Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Philippa Jefferies and I'm here with Prasad, also from Cybersecurity Magazine, and we are with James Robson from the Evidence Quarter to talk about Trusted Data Intermediaries and the upcoming Privacy Enhancing Technologies European Summit. Welcome, James. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, Philippa and Rajeev. Absolute pleasure to be speaking with you today. Thank you so much.
That's all right. Please, could you kind of start by introducing yourself and your background in security a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So I'm actually a data protection officer for the Evidence Quarter, and I've been kind of dedicated to the GDPR for my sins for almost a decade now, since its beginnings, if you like, and then many years before that within cybersecurity. And in fact, I ran learning and development academies around security for multiple vendors and managed teams of delivery and pre-sales and salespeople in cybersecurity before moving over to the data protection dark side. But yeah, I'm a DPO currently for 6 organizations within the Evidence Quarter, and it probably will help if I explain the Evidence Quarter a little bit. It's made up of research organizations, and a number of those are part of what's called the government's What Works network. So the words what works are quite important because they've put money in and invested in conducting research on what works in different societal areas. So there's a what works for higher education, what works for children's social care, what works for early intervention, what works for kind of add the words afterwards. And so I'm data protection officer for some of those organizations. They're funded by central government, and they're essentially plugging the gap between the government spending money and developing policy on areas of society based on evidence-based research. So there's a big development going on there. So I'm privileged to manage and keep data secure within those research projects.
And is security like an important area in these research topics?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important. Simply because some of the sensitivities of the data that is being captured and transferred and processed within the systems, the folders, the places where the research is being conducted. So using software and systems to process administrative data, record interviews that they have with people, and having such sensitivities like children on care protection plans where there may have been incidents or they may have been removed from the home and things. So you can imagine in sort of GDPR language, the possibility of having motivated intruders trying to get hold of that information, and that information being, incredibly sensitive, because if you have a parent that has been had their child removed, then of course they're very motivated to maybe make a discovery of where that child may be. So cybersecurity has to be completely embedded into everything we do from not just a technical standpoint, but it's got to be organizational, contractual, and technical, in that triad, really. Of course, meeting one of the principles of the GDPR as well, ensuring that it's processed via secure means. So yeah, completely embedded in everything we do.
That is quite interesting, and I think everybody would agree, security and cybersecurity and just the know-how and the way the policies are brought in place. Yeah, again, as you said, should be embedded in all decisions across the various applications, right? I'm curious to know how far back was this decision taken by the government, or the government you're representing, to start looking at it in such a practical manner. Can you talk a little about that? How old this whole initiative is?
Yeah, sure. I probably wouldn't say I'm representing the government. I just happen to be in one of the research organisations that is funded by governments. But I believe it goes back as 2013, when you may have heard of the organisation called NICE, the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, and they are deemed to be the first What Works organization. And I think the concept of the What Works as a network of centers, it's only been around maybe kind of 5, 6, maybe 7 years. And they've developed over time to establish research and evidence-based research in specific sectors. And the National Audit Office, I went to an event with them, and they were presenting on the fact that the UK government currently spends £1.4 trillion a year on public services, and only 8% of that has any robust evidence-based research on effectiveness and impact. Another 7% doesn't have robust research, but does have some evidence-based research, meaning you've got close to 85% of all spending that does not have any research or evidence-based research on whether or not it's having an impact positively or not. Now, don't get me wrong, the money's spent, there's clever people out there, that the money's being used well, and you can see if it's having an impact or not. But if you need to point to science and a paper written on those things, well, chances are it hasn't been done. Well, believe it or not, the UK is a leading light in the fact of producing such evidence. So it gives you a bit of a global perspective on the fact that evidence based upon government spending, scientific-based evidence, has not really been conducted. So we're surprisingly far behind. I think globally, where everyone sort of thinks, well, the government knows what it's spending its money on, and knows where it's going, knows if it's having an impact or not. I was in a presentation today from a great organisation that's also in the Evidence Quarter that I'm DPO for. They're not a What Works network organisation, but they're called Centre for Evidence and Implementation. And they get a lot of contracts around the world to conduct research. And the presentation actually said, well, research has been done that it takes about 17 years from the point of the research being done to it getting into policy and implemented into policy. 17 years from the point that and only 14% of that research actually gets implemented into policy. So it's 17 years for 14%. And then they went on to say, well, that's been done for clinical research, and it's not really known for social research. So, there's huge gaps, not just in, evidence around this, but actually the implementation of what works and what is discovered to work to then spread out and I guess spread the positivity and beneficial impacts of such research as well. So yeah, it's fascinating where things actually lie and the things I get to see. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then kind of moving on to what we want to talk about in this podcast, which is data intermediaries. Just to start with, what are data intermediaries? Like, what does this term really mean?
Yeah, sure. So data intermediaries. Well, if we take that statistic of that 17 years and 14%, then one of the barriers to research is getting access to data, and actually it's fairly slow. Over the last 2 years, I've actually been privileged enough to put together a data archive for one of the organisations I'm DPO for. It's called they've just merged, and now they're called What Works for Early Intervention and Children's Social Care. But I created an archive in the Office for National Statistics, and their archiving service is called the Secure Research Service, because it's fundamentally a location to provide access for other researchers to do data on that's been previously collected. So it's a secondary use of this data, so secondary analysis. And there's a surprising few amount of these centralized databases that contains this information. And in fact, to take that one step further, this concept further as well, I ended up inadvertently, I say inadvertently, I didn't know I was going to be this, if you like, but I ended up being the first person to put non-governmental research data into the ONS in the UK. Okay. So So you know, it's an amazing thing to realize. Oh, I just did that. I just got on with the job that I was given, and didn't realize it hadn't been pioneered before. But it really led me to have to understand, because I'm not from a research background personally. I'm from a cybersecurity background. It led me to realize that that there are these things called trusted intermediaries or data intermediaries. And in fact, the Office for National Statistics Secure Research Service, which holds all this data, is actually known as a trusted research environment. So they have an archive, and then they have processes and mechanisms to allow further research. And so that's known as a trusted research environment. They basically spin up a virtual desktop and provide secure access, everything from it's of course behind firewalls, a multi-factor authentication in there, safe settings. In fact, they've got a whole kind of gold standard process that they developed called the 5 safes. So they're making sure the data is safe. Is it anonymous, or is it anonymized as it possibly can be? The people who are accessing that data, are they accessing it in the right way? So it's safe access. Then there's the safe people. You can only be a verified ONS accredited researcher. You have to go to a course to be able to do so. Are you from a trusted institution like a university or recognized research organization? And then there's safe settings. So literally you will have to go to a pod, not dissimilar to the one that I'm currently in, to get access to that data via what's essentially going to be a dumb terminal that you can only access through that terminal. And I forget the last one. We're going to safe for people, safe settings, safe access. There's another safe in there. Safe outputs. That's it. So they do an ethics review on whether or not you are using that data for public good. And that's kind of a defined term. And they've got a panel that reviews on a weekly basis at the ONS to do that. Now, that's a very long-winded way of saying it's a big database and people can get access to it. But a trusted data intermediary, which ONS really is, actually is providing access from data that could be in other locations and remain in other locations. And the trusted bit is, well, how do you provide the privacy over that data of the people whose data that is, or it's about, and also remain with the utility of that data? You can use it in the form that it's meant to be used, or it's really useful, but you're still protecting the privacy. Now, this is where trusted data intermediaries come into play, because they can then use privacy enhancing technologies. And one of the questions that pops up from somebody I'm sure you've come across, Andrew Trask, he's very big in the privacy enhancing technology space, is can you still get usefulness from data you can't see? And can you get access to data you can't see? And then you think of things like, well, what federated learning. The data stays in the location, the algorithm is run locally, and then whatever's needed is sent to what's known as an enclave or trusted execution environment, where further computation is conducted on that data. That now you don't need to know whose data that is, but in this location, and then the output is also kept private through the encryption mechanisms that can be put into play. So you literally don't even need to pull the data into this centralized database or location. You just need the algorithm and the encrypted information to come to a place in a very secure place known as a trusted execution environment to run it. So what trusted data intermediary can do is be, well, both the centralized location if you need it to be, or the connector of data from those external distributed locations. So it's kind of this federated sort of platform. Does that sort of make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it does. Let me just try to break it down a little bit and ask a few questions, if I may. So, so the underlying aspect of this data intermediary is that it's the data is federated, and as to the metadata of that content, if you like, is protected as well. That's the privacy aspect. So the publisher of the data and the user of the data are safe, in the way they go about utilizing or working with the data. What I was wondering is, so are we looking at a third party that would step in to facilitate this, or is this a process that would be practiced by, say, a healthcare system?
Yeah, sure.
So how
sure.
do you see the facilitation initially?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, and I think that's where the sector is in terms of, because what you're talking about is, well, isn't that just an A to B conversation? Data's here, either move it here or just get access from A to B. That's it. The problem you have is that that is a lengthy negotiation process, contractually in one ways, and legally, of course, that's quite difficult to get your head around. That all the legislation needs to enable that access of that data and sharing all access of that data, and then there's the technological aspect. So to be able to do that, you need significant investments as an individual or an organization to do so. So you mentioned healthcare. It's actually probably quite timely because I think within the last month, the NHS has put out a contract or invitation to tender for a contract for the federated data platform, which is all 70 years of NHS data to be used for research purposes. Yeah, £360 million a contract with another 400 million on top of that, earmarked for the future. So, and so that sort of speaks to what you're talking about in terms of, well, could an organization just do it themselves? And that's the thing. I think there's probably a barrier of entry for individual organizations to do that, because they have to have such a skill set from one location and then be able to convince and implement at the other end as well. So it's not just A to B, it's B training A, and A maybe having the skill set as well, and you don't quite get there. So what there really needs to be is kind of, is it consultancy, is it technology, but it's an understanding of the whole ecosystem. And that's what a trusted data intermediary is. So part consultancy, but also the ability to implement privacy enhancing technologies to allow for access. So you've got this sort of web of connectivity, secure connectivity, but also being able to have the skill set for the legality and the legal mechanisms on there. And it's very curious, especially the space that I find myself in, because I'm a DPO really now, and dedicated, absolutely full-time kind of DPO for 6 years, and I'm not the technologist of the PETS technology, but I understand it, and I'm not a lawyer either, but I've been working with the law and having to understand that in granular detail as well. But if you look at what's going on, you've got this kind of disparate or seemingly disparate groups that are trying to kind of like eye each other up to go, well, how do we work together? One is the technologists, and one is, I think, the people that have the data. Like, we have all this data, we want to do something with it. It'd be great to analyze and research and get it connected. I'm not too sure how. We think the law is in the way. Then you've got the legal bods up here, and they're like, great, we think that it is possible, but we're going to be incredibly risk averse because we don't trust the technology, and we're not sure if the people that own the data or have that data are able to implement technology in a way to be compliant up against law. So then you have this you've got this triad. As a data protection person, I'm like, well, I'm dead center in that triangle. And then I'm in the middle of a research or set of research organizations that are being pioneered by government to get hold of the most sensitive data to conduct this research on. And so I'm getting to see all these kind of bits and bobs, and I've gone, wow, privacy enhancing technologies are amazing. And I sort of put myself on some courses and think about, well, how do you improve this? And it can be done. And my belief is trusted data intermediaries are the way to do that, because they will have the legal understanding, the technical understanding, the technical infrastructure, and then the relationships with the data providers as well. So you end up going, okay, Mr. Researcher over here, or Mrs. Researcher, Miss Researcher over here, going, I wouldn't mind getting hold of this data over here. How do I do so? And you can either spend, 6 months to a year in negotiation, which generally is what happens. In fact, as I digress a little, but going back to the Office for National Statistics, upon applying to get access to that data, it'll take you 3 to 6 months, because of the timescales that they have to adhere to and all the checks that they have to do. Now, I think that can be outsourced to an intermediary to go, we've already set up with this ecosystem and framework.
Right.
You all you have to do is kind of check our boxes in the right way, and there's lots of other more kind of nuanced technical things that we'd have to undertake and make sure, but we'd have those frameworks set up and go, right, okay, data's here, we're doing the brokerage and negotiation, technically, legally, and we've got the researcher over here wanting it. There you go, just makes sense. And the kicker to all this, which is almost the scary part of everything, is, well, that data is held by an organization, but isn't that data of people? It's individuals. Wouldn't those individuals want to know where their data is and what's going on with that data? Well, of course they do. Is that done now? The answer is no. I mean, all we really hear about is how bad that is in terms of, well, where's our data? Things are being hacked, things are being lost. We're possibly being manipulated to vote a certain way in Cambridge Analytica scandals and yada, yada, yada. We don't think the law is there.
So
yeah.
Let me jump in again. This is obviously very exciting conversation. And by and large, the big verticals or the big sectors get the main focus, right? The healthcare and of course the cryptocurrencies, and that's a hot ticket item. I'm sure we can spend another hour just talking on that. But actually, I want to draw the attention just very briefly to what I noticed during the pandemic. So I'm a father, I have a couple of kids, pandemic, kids were studying from home. And I noticed how advanced the LMS systems have become, and all the materials were online. They were set up on their computers provided by the school. And as we speak, I realize how, in fact, the educational sector perhaps is far more complicated, meaning that there are many different players participating in that sector. So you have the content holders. So I'm a publisher. Our content are being utilized hypothetically by schools to teach these kids. So my immediate concern is, how is my IP? How is it protected? How is it getting used? One. The other is, as a parent, I'm concerned about what's happening to my children, and I would like to know that the teachers who are accessing and addressing the class virtually have been vetted. Which, I mean, these are very fundamental things, but it's even far more complicated, I imagine, because everybody with there's too many stakeholders. And it'll be interesting to see how the whole governance can be created to manage this. And I suppose the intermediary would be an option that makes more sense, right? To have a third party with no interest per se.
Yeah, absolutely. The key to intermediaries are really that they're neutral, completely neutral, and they're the pipework, if you like. They can be custodians of data, and stewards of data as well. And they're using the technology in a way to be able to broker those relationships, but also have the knowledge of the vast ecosystem of legal frameworks that have to be in place. So what's really interesting is that there is still this sort of difference between US, EU, UK legislation around us guys over here, us guys and girls over here have been GDPRized, if you like. And if you're an employee that hasn't had some GDPR training within the last 5 years, then you've been living under some sort of rock. Whereas in the US, there's still this slow proliferation of state by state legal frameworks around data protection popping up. You've got kind of the California Consumer Protection Act and CPRA as well there, and I believe there's been either an enactment or a proposal in New York recently that is a very interesting comparative to GDPR as well. So those things are happening, but you're completely right. The whole idea of having an intermediary as well, we've got this problem between EU and US, of course, because Privacy Shield broke, because of Max Schrems kind of debunking that and taking it through the courts. And although you've had the handshakes between EU and US presidents, well, has that actually fixed the problem? No, and I think a lot of US companies are suffering because EU-based companies are saying, well, we're just not going to transfer our data over there, despite the fact that everyone still uses Microsoft and Google and all the other players, and so it's very difficult to have that data sovereignty. But that's sort of becoming a big thing. So you have an intermediary to go, well, we don't need to have the data leave the EU if it's being processed in the US. It can be done anonymously, or what is more fascinating is the development of something called functional anonymization. So the way the data is used means there is no way for that user to ever be able to re-identify that data. Although from the point of that where it will be processed in that way that makes it functionally anonymized, well, it's still identifiable data. So that's the curiosity here. And even the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK have printed, I think it's now 5 booklets worth of information about anonymization and privacy enhancing technologies in that. Well, what if you have an intermediary that is doing all these trust scores around, well, how are you managing this sort of maybe a 5 safes approach? So the gold standard of how you curate access in a virtual environment to analyze or use that data in a privacy preserved technique, privacy enhancing technology way as well. And that research around being able to do that as an intermediary is currently underway as well. There's something called the DARE UK project, which is called I want to use the word decentralized, but that's not what it is. It's Digital and Analytics Research Environments, DARE UK, which is an incredible study to bring together. It's been pioneered to bring together different governmental-based data sets within UKRI, UK Research and Innovation, and they fund a lot of research. And so they've got a lot of different units and business units, and they've got a lot of data. So this pioneering pilot project called DARE UK is going, well, how do we make this all completely interoperable? And they funded 9 separate research exemplars, everything from kind of the Alan Turing Institute to the Crick Institute, the Wellcome Trust, universities, Oxford, Cambridge, Glasgow, I think is in there, and a bunch of others. Apologies if somebody's listening from there and I don't name them, but and they're doing amazing stuff. The Social Data Foundation down in Southampton, pioneering kind of this risk scoring as well up against, well, the technology, the law that's in place, the data sharing agreements that are in place, the availability and how data is made available and all this kind of stuff. So an intermediary is basically all of that in one, but it's incredibly complicated. That's understood, and not, I dare I say this, I don't think many people are very aware of this concept, and it's not ubiquitous yet. And I think it will be, because I was reading, the Yuval Noah Harari book, his second book, called Homo Deus, and at the end of that, he mentions the concept of dataism. It may be our next, entity that's bigger than ourselves, and we trust the data more than we trust people and the facts, and the whole idea of wearable technologies, reporting information back to yourself, whereas and you making decisions based on that information, whereas previously you may have had a bit of a tummy rumble or a stomach ache, and you make a decision off that, and that may or may not be the right decision. Now the app and the data from the app gives you a more informed decision-making process. And in some ways, we're really moving to that space where dataism, maybe it's that concept, maybe it's not, but data-driven everything. So data-driven innovation, data-driven decision-making. Mm-hmm. And then you go, well, why can't there be data-driven life-saving and policy-making and all this kind of stuff? And it just sort of makes sense. It sort of becomes common sense. But the fear is well, how do you keep it private? Because mm-hmm. I don't want people reading my emails, I don't want people knowing everything about me. The age-old cliche of, I don't know if it's a cliche now, but I heard this a while ago, the cliche of I'm posting pictures on a social media site of me being on a beach somewhere, and somebody knows I'm not at home, mm-hmm. and they suddenly know where I live. It's like, well, I don't really want that, I don't really want to be tracked that much. So how do you preserve that privacy?
So is the intermediary effectively targeting those kind of data which needs to be protected behind not necessarily a paid wall, but needs to be protected and not publicly available as easily as some of the other content? Or is there a policy being created to sort of legitimize the contents which are also available as a free access?
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of things to unpick there, which is a really great question. One of the things is, I don't believe a data intermediary should have a paywall in front of data or be paid for use of data. I don't think that's the right approach. In fact, to really kind of hit that home, I'm a true believer in data altruism with the definitions straight out of the EU Data Governance Act, and that's specifically data that's made available without reward for purely non-commercial usage that benefits communities or society at large. That's my remit. Now, don't get me wrong; other people may, want to put a paywall in front of data, but that's not my remit. But coming back to your point, it's more of a firewall, that a recognized security term. Well, you can't get across the Motte and Bailey castled, walled kind of data location, which some people term a data safe haven. And well, what data is that? And yes, it's the stuff that we would feel uncomfortable it being shared or manipulating us in some other way by a nefarious actor to go, I am going to get you to do this thing or think this way or something else. Because, hey, the whole fake news society that we seem to live in at the moment, we're not too sure what's real, what's fake, and what's fact as opposed to opinion, and where is all that? And wouldn't we like to ask the data? But then that data could be manipulated in a certain way. There's a great book by Ben Goldacre, who's actually I'll get into Ben Goldacre in a second, but he wrote a book around how data could be used, how data's used in a way to have certain results. So you can use it and go like, I'm looking for this. Okay, I can find this in data, and then that can necessarily become the report that I give because I can make the stats look this way. Bad research. I think the book might be called something like Bad Research.
Bad Science, I think.
Bad Science, that's the one.
I've also read that book. It's a very good book.
Yeah, fascinating.
But it's interesting what you're saying, Elliot, about, I think it was safe output, about the ethics of actually what the data is being used for. Because I think that's an interesting, another point aside from it, as like we could talk forever about the securing the data, but then, once they have it, what are they using it for and how can it be manipulated, I guess. I'm really sorry to interrupt because we're having a great conversation. It could go on forever, but we are coming to the end of our time. I just wanted to kind of finish mentioning the event, the Privacy Enhancing Technology Summit in London at the end of February, 28th to the 1st of March, I believe. Just any final thoughts on kind of privacy enhancing technology, you've talked about a lot already, but the importance of this when it comes to data intermediaries.
Yeah, it's the future. I mean, these technologies are only going to um, become a bigger part of our lives in a way that we may not notice. It's almost like it's the wiring behind the light switch and how does the light turn on. We don't understand that bit, but it's going to be the same for data and decision making. You just sort of press up a couple of buttons, but in the background, all these technologies are running very quickly. Yeah, the importance of pets, I don't think can be understated. I think they are essentially what will be the next revolution in technology, but silent revolution. And it's not, in my mind, it's not even necessarily the realms of let's take the idea of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and the other sort of faddy things. Not that cryptocurrency is necessarily a fad; it's been around for ages. But AI is a concept, and everyone's trying to work that one out. And blockchain is a concept, trying to work that one out. And do we understand it? Do we not? Pets are basically the underlying foundation of everything in the future, and intermediaries will be the people that are controlling them. And at the moment where we are with pets, in my mind, that's why the conference is going to be amazing. It is the fact that, well, people are doing a lot of research on pets. Can we use pets to do this? And I think it actually should be the other way around. What do we want to do, and can we use pets to enable that? And that is what I see the kind of the bridge within this conference as well. That's why I'm excited about it.
Well, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, I'll put the link to the summit so anyone interested can find out some more information. But yes, thank you so much, James, for joining us and for such an interesting conversation.
You're welcome. Been a pleasure. Thank you so much.